In 1910, deep in the mountains of Colorado, a small railroad community depended on one company for almost everything: jobs, homes, stores, transportation, and even the future its families imagined. For years, the people of the town believed that as long as the railroad remained, their lives would remain secure. But when the company finally pulled away, they discovered a difficult truth. A future built entirely on someone else's promise can disappear the moment that promise is withdrawn. The town was called St. Elmo, one of Colorado's remote mountain communities where railroads and mining had once brought life deep into the Rocky Mountains. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, St. Elmo served as an important stop along mountain transportation routes, surrounded by mines, forests, and steep peaks. At its busiest, hundreds of people lived and worked in the community. For families who settled there, the railroad represented opportunity. Trains carried supplies into the mountains, or traveled toward distant markets. Hotels welcomed travelers. Stores sold food, tools, clothing, and mining equipment. Everything seemed connected. Among the people who understood that connection was a young railway worker named Thomas Reed. Thomas had arrived in the mountains believing that a steady railroad job was all a man needed to build a secure future. The company provided his wages, the town provided his home, the railroad provided transportation. He felt protected. Every payday, Thomas brought his earnings home and told his wife, Clara, that their future was becoming safer. "We have the railroad," he would say. "As long as the trains come, we will be all right." Clara sometimes asked him what would happen if the railroad ever stopped. Thomas laughed. Why would it? To him, the railroad seemed permanent. The mountains looked permanent too. But history rarely respects what people believe will last forever. St. Elmo had grown because transportation made the remote location economically useful. Mining activity brought workers into the surrounding mountains, while rail connections made it possible to move people, equipment, and valuable ore. But mountain railroads were expensive to maintain. Snow could block tracks, mining operations could decline, routes could become less profitable. And when transportation patterns changed, isolated communities could suffer quickly. Thomas noticed some of these changes as the years passed. Fewer passengers arrived, some mines began producing less, several businesses struggled during slow seasons, a few families moved away. But Thomas still trusted the railroad. Other workers began preparing themselves for uncertainty. One mechanic started repairing farm machinery on the side, a storekeeper expanded his business to serve nearby travelers, another family purchased additional land outside town. Thomas thought they were being unnecessarily cautious. "The company has taken care of us for years," he told them. But one older worker gave him a warning: never confuse a reliable employer with a permanent future. Thomas remembered the sentence but did not take it seriously. Then the world changed. Across America, transportation technology was evolving. Automobiles became more common, roads improved. Mountain railroads that had once been essential could no longer assume that every route would remain profitable forever. For St. Elmo, the decline was gradual, but its consequences were enormous. Mining activity weakened, rail transportation became less important, businesses lost customers, people began leaving. The town that had once sounded with train whistles and human voices became increasingly quiet. Thomas finally understood what the older worker had meant. The railroad had never promised to exist forever. Thomas had simply assumed it would. One winter morning, he stood beside the station and watched a train disappear into the snowy mountains. He realized that for years he had been building his entire future around something he did not control. His wages were controlled by the company. Transportation depended on the railroad. Opportunities depended on the local economy. Even the population of the town depended on businesses and industries he could not influence. He had worked hard, but he had never truly built independence. As the community declined, Thomas began changing his approach. He started learning skills outside railroad work. He repaired farm tools for nearby residents. He learned more about carpentry. He saved money instead of spending every paycheck. Clara began selling handmade goods to travelers and families in surrounding communities. Their goal was simple: if the railroad disappeared, their ability to survive should not disappear with it. Eventually, the railroad's importance to St. Elmo faded dramatically. Many residents left, stores closed, buildings were abandoned. The once busy community became a shadow of what it had been. But Thomas and Clara were better prepared than they had been years earlier. They eventually left the mountain town too. Their departure was not the end of their lives. It was the beginning of something they had finally built for themselves. Thomas found work using skills he had developed outside the railroad. The experience changed the way he raised his children. He never told them that employers were bad. He taught them something different. Work for others, he would say, but never forget to build something of your own. Decades passed. St. Elmo became one of Colorado's best-known ghost towns. Its weathered wooden buildings remained among the mountains, preserving the memory of a community that had once depended heavily on mining and transportation. Today, visitors can walk through the quiet streets and imagine what the town looked like when trains and workers filled the valley. But the abandoned buildings tell a deeper story. The people of St. Elmo did not fail because they worked too little. Many worked incredibly hard. Their mistake was believing that hard work for one system automatically guaranteed a permanent future. The railroad was valuable, the jobs were valuable, the community was valuable, but none of them were permanent. History offers this lesson again and again. A factory can close, a company can relocate, a mine can run out of ore, a railroad can abandon a route, an industry can disappear. When a person's entire future depends on something controlled by someone else, that person becomes vulnerable to decisions they cannot make.
Building independence does not mean refusing help. It means developing skills, saving resources, learning continuously, creating opportunities, and preparing for change. St. Elmo's abandoned streets remain quiet beneath the Colorado mountains, but they still tell a powerful story. The future should never depend entirely on someone else's promise. Because companies change, industries disappear, jobs end, places fade. But the skills you build, the knowledge you gain, and the courage to stand on your own can travel with you anywhere. And perhaps that is why the forgotten buildings of St. Elmo still matter today. They remind us that working hard is important, trusting others can be valuable, but building your entire future on something you cannot control can be dangerous. Because when the support disappears, the person who built nothing for themselves may be left with nowhere to stand. The strongest future is not the one someone else promises to give you. It is the one you slowly learn to build with your own hands.